Hello folks, my name is Sam Sutter. I'm the District Attorney of Bristol County, and I'd like to welcome you to my monthly show, In the Spotlight. Each month, I'll be talking to a guest who has exceptional knowledge or is a leader in a major issue vital to our entire region. This month, I'm very happy to have with me someone who is both a leader and has exceptional knowledge, and that is Diane Turco, who is the co-founder of Cape Downwinders. Diane, welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for agreeing to appear, and let me begin by asking you, what is Cape Downwinders, and how did you happen to start this organization?
All right. Well, Cape Downwinders is a citizen activist group, and our goal is to protect the public on the Cape and Islands against the threat of the Pilgrim nuclear power reactor in Plymouth. We began this group about 25 years ago when Boston Edison Company owned Pilgrim, and it was shut down for 2 years because of spent fuel rod problems, dangers in the community, the operation of the reactor, and it was restarted in 1988 against the objections of all of the elected officials at the time. And I thought it just didn't make sense in a democracy where our elected officials and the people are saying don't restart this reactor, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission just kind of steamrolled over the public's opinion and restarted the reactor.
Had you ever been involved in community activism before? What led you to begin this movement on Cape Cod?
Well, Fukushima blew away the myth that nuclear power is safe. And we had been working on expanding the emergency planning zone since the 80s, since the restart of Pilgrim, because we knew that the population was at risk. And so with Fukushima, it really reactivated us. We had been working, like I said, to expand the zones. That never happened. We also worked on a campaign to get potassium iodide out to the public, too, in, I think it was 2001. But recently, we're calling for the closing of Pilgrim because of what we've been told about the dangers and that we are at imminent risk.
So back to the founding, which was in 1988, as I recall from our previous conversation. Tell me about the history of the organization and the movement on Cape Cod over the 25-year period between the founding and I think it's 25 years, and the accident at Fukushima, actually 24 years maybe.
Right. Year after year, we supported legislation to expand the emergency planning zone to include the Cape and the Islands. And year after year, it died in committee. 1 year, it did pass the Senate at the State House. Another year, it passed the House, but it never passed both chambers at the same time, so it was never enacted. So we just saw that here are some of our public safety officials trying to work to help us on the Cape, but it just never passed, never went through.
And then, of course, in 2011, I believe, the accident at Fukushima took place. And what was going on in your organization at the time, prior to the accident, and then what transpired with your organization after the accident? Well,
all through the time we knew that that Pilgrim was a Mark I boiling water reactor. It's a General Electric made reactor that was designed in the 50s and 60s, built in the early 70s. And we also knew, too, that the containment structure was a failed design. Actually, 3 of the General Electric engineers resigned in the 80s because of that. They said the containment wouldn't contain if there was a severe accident. And even the Nuclear Regulatory Commission acknowledged that. Harold Denton said in 1986 that there's a 9% chance of failure in the event of a severe accident.
That sounds high. That's a 1 in 10 chance of a failure, and that was said back in the mid-1980s.
Yes. So the containment won't contain. So there's the main structure for public safety wasn't going to work. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had vents put on these Mark I reactors.
What year would that have been?
That was in the 80s, late 80s. Yeah. But again, too, so we go to Fukushima, and then when Fukushima happened, it was the same Mark I General Electric boiling water reactor. Same failed design. All those safety vents failed in Fukushima. So the lessons learned were that nuclear accidents will happen. They have catastrophic consequences, and we have the same reactor in our backyard.
But unfortunately, not enough has changed at Pilgrim since Fukushima. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, even that it was relicensed. It was relicensed over the objection of the governor, the attorney general, a congressman, state senator. They asked not to relicense the reactor until public health and safety concerns were addressed, and even the head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Gregory Jasko, voted against the relicensing of Pilgrim. And you would think that 5 members of a Nuclear Regulatory Commission voting for relicensing a reactor for 20 more years would be a unanimous vote.
So the head said no, but the other 4 said yes,
yes.
And the reactor was relicensed, and that was, I think, the spring to early summer of 2012.
Yes.
I remember
Yeah.
that well.
Yeah.
I was running for Congress at the time. I was vehemently against the relicensing. And now tell our viewers what's transpired since the relicensing. So backtrack to the summer of 2012. I can say this as sort of a lead into this question, that I know that 2013 was a lousy year for the reactor at Pilgrim. I think that they had more incidents in that year than, I can't remember the exact comparison, but far too many problems that particular year. And tell me what has transpired since the summer of 2012 and what your organization is trying to do about it.
Okay, but I want to thank you during your campaign that you
that's-
brought up Pilgrim. It
thank
was a
you.
primary important issue because it's public safety for this whole area.
I agree.
Yes, thank you.
I haven't forgotten.
Thank you. Yes. We need more politicians like you who stand up
Thank you.
for the folks. But what has transpired is that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's own technical staff determined that in order to ensure public safety and health in a severe accident at Mark I boiling water reactors, that there needed to be filters on the vents on these reactors. And the commissioners voted against immediate implementation of vents. Only the chairwoman, Allison McFarland, voted for the filters because she had seen the devastation in Japan. So there's one thing. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is even saying they cannot ensure our public safety.
Tell our viewers, so the vents were added in the 80s, but the vents didn't work in Fukushima.
Right, they all
So
failed.
then there was a push for filters, and the filters still haven't been added, right?
Yes,
And
they were
what would the filters, and they haven't been added because they're too,
Money.
Energy's view is too expensive.
Right.
And so what would the filters do? Why are they so urgent?
Well, because it's a failed design, the containment will not contain, which was what it was meant to do. So these filters would be, these vents would be opened up in the event of a severe accident to release the pressure, and it would also release all the radioactive materials into the environment, into the population. And that's such a serious danger. Radiation is deadly.
And the cost, the approximate cost of these filters.
I think it's like $1.2, $1.5 million. But the industry
Overall, or
for each filter, but
right.
but overall, it's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is owned by the industry, and they will sway their votes to whatever the pressure of the industry. We also have.
And isn't it true on that thought, the influence of the industry on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission? Isn't it true that the previous head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is now speaking out about that very reality?
Yes, he's calling for
Gregory Jasko.
Yes.
What does he say?
He is saying close nuclear reactors. They're just not safe, and particularly these Mark I boiling water reactors. They should be the first offline.
So
Because Fukushima, again, too, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said there's a chance of failure of 90%. That Fukushima was not an accident; it was a prediction that came true.
And the triggering event for Fukushima was what?
Well, people say, well, we're not going to have these kind of earthquakes, even though Pilgrim is identified by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as the second most vulnerable of core damage in the event of an earthquake in our area. But the earthquake knocked out the electricity in Japan. The tsunami knocked out the backup generators. But it's actually the loss of electricity for cooling the reactor that caused the accident. And that can happen here. It happened here in, there was a blizzard in 2012 where the electricity was knocked out. And it's just a matter of time. The spent fuel pool, which is on the attic of the reactor and holds, was designed for 880 assemblies, holds over 3,200. If the coolant ever was knocked out of that area and the water drained out, there could be a fire that would not be extinguished. And according to an Attorney General's report by Dr. Gordon Thompson, it would cost 24,000 latent cancers, it would cost $488 billion in damage, and it would contaminate hundreds of miles downwind. This is a serious, serious danger in our backyard.
So as I recall from my study in 2012, there are three main areas of vulnerability for that reactor. And the first is just as you were just describing, and that is that we have too many spent fuel rods in too little space. Would you talk about the risks associated with that and also the particulars? As I remember from our conversation yesterday, I mean, we're now up to, I think, 3,800 of these spent fuel rods, and they're contained in space that was built for maybe 1,000.
880, yes.
Okay.
If I could just skip back just
please.
to the vents and the filters.
Yep.
Senator Edward Markey declared that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has abdicated its role to provide for public health and safety by not requiring these filters.
Okay.
So here's another. The NRC has said they can't ensure safety, and Senator Markey has also said they cannot ensure safety.
So it's vents and filters, one problem.
Right.
Spent fuel rods, a
Right.
second major problem. Talk about that a little bit and what the risks are associated with that.
Okay, well, the assemblies are put into a pool. It's in the attic of the building. It's surrounded by concrete, but the roof is like a tin roof.
Have you been in there, by the way?
No, I've tried to get, no. No, I haven't been in there.
But I know, for example, your state senator, Dan
Yes.
Wolf, who's called for the closing, right?
Yes, he
has had a tour.
Yes, and he was appalled
What if
at
they
the.
give me a tour?
I don't. Why don't you ask?
I may
Why
ask.
don't you ask?
Yeah, I may ask. Yes. So anyway, talk about the
it was
spent
designed
fuel
for
rods
880
again. Right.
assemblies to be temporarily housed and put into a federal repository, but the federal repository never materialized, as we all know. But the industry keeps producing the waste.
Right.
So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has to change the regulations. They tend to do this. So now it was loosely stacked. The water and cooling could get around it. Well, now it's densely stacked in re-racked and re-racked. And there's over 3,200 assemblies there now. In fact, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has said they can only go up to 3,800. They always have to keep out over 500 in case they have to upload from the reactor quickly. So right now, Entergy would have to shut down if they didn't have the dry cast system starting to be developed.
I see.
Yes.
So problem number 2. And then problem number 3, major problem number 3 is, once again, as I recall, the vulnerability, the inherent vulnerability in the plan and the plan's design to a terrorist attack. I can't remember exactly what State Senator Wolf said about that, but it was alarming. And your thoughts on that?
Well, it is.
aspect?
I mean, the roof of the spent fuel pool is a thin metal sheet, and that's it. It was designed so if there was an accident, it would blow up and go up straight as opposed to out into the direct environment.
And what does the NRC say publicly about the risk of a meltdown, of an accident, of an attack? What's their public statement about that?
Well, the Pentagon has said that Pilgrim is the 8th most vulnerable for a terrorist attack from the water. What the NRC did when they relicensed Pilgrim, they did not have to consider the spent fuel pool and the dangers of the spent fuel pool, and they didn't have to consider emergency planning, even though the population has like quadrupled since the 70s with its original license.
Well,
so the NRC doesn't really look at those issues.
So that's the perfect segue into what we're going to be talking about after the break, which is the evacuation plan, or I should say the lack of an evacuation plan for Cape Cod and for Bristol County, when we return to In the Spotlight. Hello, folks. Welcome back to In the Spotlight. When we took a break, we were talking about the risk of a catastrophic accident at Pilgrim Nuclear. And just so that you know that when we talk about, for example, if Fukushima was triggered by an earthquake, in the last year there have been 3 earthquakes in this region. The highest was a 2.5 in New Bedford. And within the past 8 years, there was an earthquake, same level, around a 2.5, in Plymouth. So this is a real valid concern. And with respect to the risk of a terror incident, someone that I know well that worked at the plant told me that in 2010 there was an incident where 2 individuals on a skiff, the motor stopped, and they actually rowed to the facility and were walking around the facility for 2.5 hours before they were observed. So these are valid concerns. And with that, I say to you, Diane, what is going on Cape Cod right now? What's transpired in the last year because of the fact that there is no evacuation plan for the 150,000 or so year-round residents on Cape Cod? And if it took place in the summer, I think the population swells to another 100,000, if I'm accurate in those statistics. So what's taken place in the last year? Something of great import has happened. Tell our viewers what it is.
Okay. Well, going back to Fukushima,
yes,
the United States government recommended an evacuation of all American citizens within 50 miles.
And 50 miles encompasses all of Cape Cod, where I used to live, and most of Bristol County, where I live now. So with that, Diane, what do you say about the lack of an evacuation plan?
Well, you know, on Cape Cod, as you know, there's 2 bridges, and we knew that the bridges were going to be closed in the event of an accident at Pilgrim.
Now, when you first told me that, I had to pause and say, would you say that again?
Yeah.
So that means that there's an accident at Pilgrim. They're going to close the Sagamore and Bourne Bridge, which means people from Cape Cod cannot head west. They have got to stay put. And the reason why that is the plan right now is because according to the Massachusetts Office of what is it? Emergency Management.
Yes, yeah.
That the people at greatest risk are the people within 10 miles.
Yes.
And they have to be able to head west or north.
Right.
And if the people from the Cape are leaving at the same time, that is going to not be a viable situation. That's going to be an untenable situation. So that's the reason. But where does that leave you?
Well, if you've been on the roads on a Sunday or
I mean, there's going to be no way.
There's no way to move.
No.
All right. So there's a 10-mile emergency planning zone, which is a nuclear regulatory determined inhalation pathway. That means in the event of an accident, they're going to try and get people out of there. There's deadly imminent danger of radiation. All right. But what a lot of people don't know is that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission also has an inhalation pathway zone, and that's 50 miles. And that includes most of Bristol County. It includes all of Cape Cod. So we are already in a danger zone that's identified by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Inhalation pathway meaning what I'm breathing in the air.
Yes, yes.
So
in an accident, the radioactive nuclides will go into a plume. They're particles that you can breathe in and become contaminated. And we know the radiation causes cancer. So you are an identified risk zone, and we are too. So we said to MEMA, so what are the plans? How are you going to protect the public? So Director Kurt Schwartz came down to the Cape in October of 2012.
Whom I know, and was very candid with you, correct?
He was
very straightforward person, very
chillingly
able.
honest.
Right. And
he told us what was going to happen. He said, you are in harm's way. There will be no evacuation. There will only be a relocation. And I had never heard that before. They're coming down in their hazmat suits. They're letting us take the radiation hit, and then they're going to relocate us. And he also said, just like at Fukushima, we won't be able to return home for a very long time. And very long time would mean years. Right? Well, like Fukushima, there's an 18-mile no-go zone around Fukushima still. And that would cover the Sagamore Bridge. That's about 12, 13 miles from Plymouth. That's also going to include Bristol County. And but the 50 miles includes Bristol County too. So we know we're in danger. You folks need to understand that too. And his prescription, and I'm not saying this in any disparaging, critical way of Kurt Schwartz, but his prescription was, as I recall from our conversation, they're going to be a massive distribution of tablets, which will act as a barrier, as a prophylactic to thyroid cancer, correct? Yes. And those tablets are called what? Everybody on the Cape can go to their public health department and get potassium iodide pills for free. It's a salt that you take before you're exposed to the plume, because in the plume there will be radioactive iodine. Right. which, if it uptakes into your thyroid, will cause thyroid cancer.
Right.
Particularly in pregnant women and the fetus, and in young children and babies. They're
And
the
how
most.
how about the elderly?
And the elderly, the elderly should take this too, but it's because of the growth in the young bodies
Right, I
and
see.
the
So
multiplication of the cells that they're most susceptible to this.
Right, a particularly acute vulnerability in
Right.
pregnant women, infants, small children.
Yes.
And but the pill is a protective measure against thyroid cancer, but not a protective measure against the other kinds of
Right.
cancers which result from this kind of an
Right.
accident. Correct?
There's more cesium-137 that would be released, and strontium and other radioactive nuclides that cause cancer. And you know what we say too is the utility is assessed to pay for these pills to be given to the public through the Department of Public Health. But you know, we question what other corporation in our democracy buys a medication for the public?
It's
In
just
order for them to operate, it's just such a violation of the public trust.
when you have, in contrast to the magnitude of this potential accident, you have let's see, the plant was originally licensed in 1970 or thereabouts?
72, yes.
Okay, so right now we're going on coming up on 45 to 50 years. As once again, quoting Dan Wolfe, as he said, what technology are we presently using from the 1970s? Not much.
Right.
So, so you would like to see the immediate closure of the plant, and I believe that there was a vote to that effect in all of the towns on Cape Cod, all 15.
Right.
In 2013?
Yes,
Tell
2000. Yes, 2013.
And tell
All
our
right.
viewers the results of that vote.
Okay. We put a public advisory question on all 15 towns on the Cape calling on.
You engineered this?
The Cape Downwinders.
Good for
if
you.
Well, you know, again, too, we talk about how our public health, safety, and democracy are all at risk because of the continued
Now,
operation
I
of the
admire you so much because
Pilgrim.
you exemplify, get involved. If there's something that's upsetting you, get involved. So
Right.
go ahead.
Right. So the best thing to do is to go to the people. And
Right.
every single town voted to call on Governor Patrick to request that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission uphold their mandate for public safety and close the Pilgrim reactor because the public safety for the Cape Cod residents and visitors is not assured. So we're saying, NRC, uphold your mandate and do your job. What happened before?
Diane, could I ask you just
Yeah.
sort of a technical question as somebody who has to run for office? Was the vote close in any town? Or were there sizable margins?
I would say there were sizable margins, yeah,
Right.
when there were actual tallies.
Yeah.
There were town meeting votes that were voice votes, so we don't have the numbers.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But before the relicensing, we had Governor Patrick, and we had Representative Keating, and Attorney General Coakley, and Dan Wolfe. And Dan Wolfe and Sarah Peake have been on it all, still shut it down.
Dan is the
But-
state senator
yes,
from
he's
from
the Cape,
Barnstable and,
yes.
and up toward Provincetown, and Sarah's the state representative, Provincetown, Truro, in those
Harwich,
towns.
yes,
Right.
yes. But all of these people said don't relicense. Once it was relicensed, a lot of the public safety public officials stepped back. It's been relicensed. We don't have any control over that. But we're asking them, every public official in the state of Massachusetts should be calling for the closing of Pilgrim because it's a severe public safety issue. We know that because of federal preemption, only the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has the authority to close a reactor. But we need people to be standing up with moral assuasion to say it needs to be shut down. Yeah.
So we're going to talk in the next 4.5 minutes about 3 topics. We're going to talk about because you just said we need to have the plant closed and we need the political leadership to stand up and say that. So I want to talk to you about the risks. I want to talk to you about what's taking place in the battle right now, and then I want to come back to the political leadership. So talk to me succinctly about your view of the risks.
Okay.
So as you played for me yesterday, a statement from somebody who is a staff member and prominent enough in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission so that he was sent 2 successive years to meetings in Plymouth, at the Plymouth Town Hall, I think.
Right.
Okay, I can't think of his first name.
Tom Setzer.
Tom Setzer.
Yes.
And what did he say?
Well, what really shocks me is that most of what I'm saying is documentation from the government officials. Tom Setzer is an NRC official, and once a year, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission must have a public meeting in Plymouth. And I asked him 2 years ago, could Fukushima happen here? And he said yes. And I was so surprised that He said yes. So the next year I asked him again, and we got it on tape, and I said, you know, I want to thank you for your honesty, for saying that Fukushima could happen here. And then he said, yes, it could. And if anybody in this room tells you otherwise, they're lying. I asked if Fukushima could happen here, and you said yes.
Absolutely. If anybody here tells you that it couldn't, they're lying to you.
Wow.
It was a very powerful statement.
Well, it is, because I think that captures, you know, as somebody who used to try a lot of cases, you look for an event, an incident, a moment that captures a larger situation. And that quote from him captures that there is a significant risk of this happening. So, second question then is, what's taking place in the battle now to get the plant closed?
Okay.
We have all the referendums from the Cape Towns. Where are we in this fight?
All right, the Barnstable County Commission has just voted for the immediate revocation of the operating license of Pilgrim. They voted on that last week. We met with the governor, who has written a letter stating that it needs to be decommissioned if the health, environmental, and safety issues are not resolved, which they aren't. So it needs to be decommissioned. We have also asked Representative Keating to amend the Atomic Energy Act. The problem with preemption...
Talk about that,
yes,
because that I think is very interesting, because the states can't act to close risky, problematic reactors right now. Viewers, think about that. The states themselves can't act because the authority was ceded to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission back when?
1954. Well, it was the Atomic Energy Act.
Long time ago.
Yes.
So, where is there potential to change that? That's in an amendment to the Act, right?
Well, we're asking, yes, the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 needs to be amended to give the states the right to provide for public health and safety and call for the closing and close a reactor if the public safety cannot be assured.
So if it was amended, the governor could act, the attorney general could move to act, the legislature could act. Right now they can't.
They can't. It's federal preemption. You can't mention public safety in a federal court, and it's tossed out because of preemption.
So you have called on our congressional delegation to support an amendment.
Yes.
And I believe I read that certain individuals in Congress have spoken out about this amendment, and you believe that that's something that is needed urgently and quickly, and you would think that that would be a bipartisan issue. I mean, health and safety is a bipartisan issue. So are you optimistic that that can be done, Diane? Are you optimistic that that can be done, an amendment to the Act, so that returning to the states the power to close plants like Pilgrim?
I'm optimistic in people power, and I trust our democracy. And as my heroine, Dr. Helen Caldicott says, that informed democracies make responsible decisions. And as we continue to inform people how change can happen, I believe it will.
And what do you need from the political leadership?
Yeah, we need the political leadership to stand up for generational responsibility and take the moral stand and call for the closing of Pilgrim nuclear reactor and put the pressure on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to do their job that they're mandated to do and provide for public health and safety. They've already said it's not assured because they don't have the filters. We already have our senators saying that the NRC has abdicated their responsibility to ensure public health and safety. What more do we need? We know it's a General Electric boiling water reactor. There's so much evidence that it needs to be closed. That the corporation continues to operate and making $1 million a day to the risk to the public is a violation of the public trust if our elected officials do not move on this.
Keep fighting.
Okay.
Great to have you. Look forward to having you back. Take care.
You.
Thanks, folks. See you next month.